In the heart of 18th-century Mexico City, where cobbled streets echoed with the pride of colonial power, one name stood above all: Vasconcelos. In 1756, this family wielded wealth so vast, even the viceroy's treasury seemed modest in comparison. Their chests brimmed with silver, their stables gleamed with golden-tacked horses, their servants dressed like nobles. But beneath this glittering surface lay a darkness no gold could polish. When the moonless nights crept in and the city lay silent under the weight of colonial slumber, terrifying screams echoed from their palatial mansion in Plaza de Santo Domingo, screams that tore through stone walls, screams no one dared investigate because they were paid off in coins, still warm with blood. But before we descend further into this twisted tale, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell, so you never miss out on chilling stories like this. Like the video if you're drawn to mysteries, and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. I love hearing from every corner of the Spanish-speaking world. Now, let's travel back to a Mexico steeped in secrets, where power and ambition danced hand in hand with terror. And one family's rise came at a chilling cost. That night, under a sky swollen with rain clouds, the Vasconcelos mansion turned restless. Windows were shut tightly, but candlelight flickered past them like whispers behind lace curtains. Inside, the servants moved in hurried silence. The usual rules of the house: no running, no speaking out of turn, no questioning seemed temporarily suspended. Fear had outranked etiquette. Don Sebastian locked himself in his study. The ornate oak door muffled his voice, but Donna Esperanza, pressing an ear to the hallway wall, could hear the edge in his tone as he barked orders into the darkness. Though no one else was in the room, downstairs, the cellar stirred to life, covered in damp stone and filled with the earthy scent of decay. The underground chambers beneath the mansion were vast, older than the house itself. Some said they predated the Spanish. Others said they were dug by the Vasconcelos themselves, long before they were known. That night, servants were summoned: 3 men, all young, all poor, all expendable. "Bring the tops," one was told. "Fetch the horses," said another. "Stay quiet. Don Sebastian is not to be disturbed." The youngest of the 3, a boy named Mateo, barely 17, asked, "Why are we burying things in the rain?" His question earned him a silent, haunted glare from José Luis, the stable hand. He'd seen things before that had kept him awake for weeks. He would not speak again. Meanwhile, little Rodrigo, too curious for his own safety, slipped from his bedroom. Clutching a candle stub, he tiptoed barefoot through the upper corridors, where the portraits of his ancestors seemed to watch with warning eyes. He wasn't afraid of ghosts? Not really. He was afraid of lies, that in this house, he knew now, was built on them. He followed the sound of shuffling boots and muffled groans down the narrow staircase near the kitchen. It was a forgotten stairway meant for servants leading directly to the wine cellar. As Rodrigo crouched near the bottom step, heart pounding, he caught sight of something that made his breath catch. There, by lantern light, Don Sebastian and 2 others were unwrapping something large and heavy from a soaked tarp. Rodrigo couldn't see clearly, but what he could make out looked too human. "It has to go deeper this time," his father's voice growled. "We can't risk another storm exposing it." Rodrigo's hand trembled, his candle flickered, and when Auki backed away slowly, but a loose stone beneath his heel betrayed him. A sharp crack echoed through the damp stairwell. All motion below stopped. "Who's there?" barked Don Sebastian. Rodrigo fled before they could find him. He didn't return to his room, though. He hid in Carmen's chamber, curling beneath the lace canopy of her bed. She found him an hour later, curled like a frightened pup, and said only one thing: "You saw it too, didn't you?" As dawn approached, the mansion grew quieter. But it wasn't peace, it was the stillness before collapse. Doña Esperanza, unable to sleep, sat in the chapel room beside her bedroom, an ornate little sanctuary filled with silver saints and candle smoke. Her rosary clutched tight. She wept in silence, the beads slipping through her fingers like grains of guilt. She whispered a prayer over and over again, not in Latin, not in Spanish, but in a strange, old tongue no servant could recognize. Later, Maria Guadalupe would tell her niece in Exocamilco she wasn't praying to the saints, her mouth was saying other names. At breakfast, no one spoke. Not Diego, hungover and pale. Not Carmen, who had stopped brushing her hair. Not Rodrigo, who refused to look at his parents. Only Don Sebastian pretended all was well. He read a shipping manifest aloud, pausing for imaginary replies, but his eyes kept drifting to the window, waiting. At precisely 9 o'clock, Don Carlos returned. No carriage, no guards, just himself, boots muddy from the rain, eyes sharp behind thin spectacles. He was let in by José Luis, who tried not to tremble. Señor Inspector, Don Sebastián greeted, his voice honeyed and hollow. We've been expecting you. I'm sure, said Don Carlos, stepping inside without removing his cloak. He didn't shake off the rain. As they sat in the drawing room, Don Carlos laid out the discrepancies again, this time in sharper detail. This invoice, he said, holding up a parchment, claims the arrival of 12 crates of Eastern ivory on August 8th, but not a single ship docked that week. Don Sebastián shrugged. Delays. The sea is unreliable. And yet your warehouse reflects the sale of the ivory 2 days earlier. How can that be? Doña Esperanza, listening from behind the curtain, felt her knees buckle. Her grip on the velvet drape tightened as Don Carlos pressed on. And these crates, where are they stored? We keep most imports in our cellar, Sebastián said too quickly. Don Carlos's eyes narrowed. Then I'd like to see it. For the first time, a flicker of panic crossed Don Sebastián's face. As Don Carlos rose to his feet, preparing to descend into the depths of the Vasconcelos mansion. No one in that room realized that centuries of silence were about to be shattered. Secrets long buried in stone and soil sealed beneath generations of lies were now clawing their way toward the surface. And with every step down into the cellar, the truth grew closer. Don Carlos descended the narrow stone steps, each one colder than the last. The cellar beneath the Vasconcelos mansion was not what he expected. He had seen merchant warehouses and wine vaults before, neat, organized, purpose-built. This felt ancient. The walls were damp with moss and candle soot, and the air hung thick with something more than dust, something metallic, earthy, like rotting iron. Behind him, Don Sebastián followed closely, trying to remain calm, but his eyes moved constantly, watching not the inspector, but the shadows. Flickering lanterns barely lit the vaulted chamber. Wooden crates stood, stacked along the sides, but they were oddly arranged as if hiding rather than storing. The floor, uneven and scattered with straw, held faint markings, drag lines that led toward a far corner of the cellar where a thick canvas sheet hung, like a curtain over part of the wall. Don Carlos stopped there. What's behind this? He asked, his voice steady. Supplies. Old ones. Unused. Don Sebastián lied smoothly, but his hand twitched toward the curtain, and that twitch said more than words. Don Carlos pulled the tarp aside. Behind it was not a wall, but a doorway, low, arched, carved into rough stone. No hinges, no handle, just a black mouth leading deeper underground. I wasn't aware you had a sub-cellar, Don Carlos said, tone sharpened. We don't, Sebastián replied. It's part of the original foundation. Unusable, unstable, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Don Carlos ducked and stepped through. What he found on the other side was not a wine cellar. The air turned colder instantly. The tunnel opened into a cavernous space lit faintly by a few dying torches. Along the stone walls, symbols had been carved, not Spanish, not Latin, but something older, almost pre-Hispanic, yet unfamiliar even to scholars of Mesoamerican history. Strange shapes looped and twisted, forming eyes, serpents, suns with too many rays, and in the center of the space, a pit, not a well, not a mine. A pit about 10 feet across, rimmed with black stones, and just deep enough to lose the bottom in shadow. Don Carlos approached it slowly. The closer he got, the more his breath slowed, not from fear, but from weight, as if something inside the pit pulled the very air inward. What is this place? He whispered. Don Sebastián stood at the edge of the room now, watching. It's where the gold came from, he said softly, almost reverently. Not from the sea, not from ships. From here. Don Carlos turned, startled. You mean there's a vein? But Don Sebastián just laughed low and bitter. No, nothing so honest. What we found, it's not mineral, it's not natural. It gives, if you feed it, if you obey. Don Carlos felt the cold in his chest now. What do you mean, feed? It. A moment of silence stretched like a taut string. You're not the first inspector to visit us, Don Sebastián said finally, but you may be the last. Before the words could fully register, Don Carlos reached for his side pistol, but Don Sebastián was faster. A sharp whistle pierced the air, and from behind the wall, 2 masked men appeared, the same laborers from the previous night, faces now blank and cold. They grabbed Don Carlos before he could react, dragging him toward the pit. He struggled, fought, screamed, but no one in the house heard, or rather, no one dared listen. Dona Esperanza sat upstairs, in the chapel, eyes shut, lips moving in that same unfamiliar chant. Carmen wept into her embroidery. Diego drank until he passed out, and little Rodrigo hid in the laundry closet, covering his ears. Down below, Don Carlos's screams echoed through stone, swallowed by darkness. Then silence. Don Sebastian stared into the pit for a long while after the body disappeared. His breathing slowed, his hands relaxed. One more, he whispered. Behind him, one of the laborers asked, "Will it be satisfied?" Don Sebastian nodded, for now. But deep in the shadows, something below shifted, not fully awake, not yet. 3 days passed. The city went on as if nothing had happened. Mexico City's markets buzzed, church bells rang, and the Plaza de Santo Domingo returned to its usual rhythm. But inside the Vasconcelos mansion, time moved differently, heavier, darker, like thick molasses in winter. The absence of Don Carlos Fernandez de Soto was quietly noted by the crown, but no alarms were raised. A man could disappear in the colonies, especially one who asked too many questions. In the drawing room, Diego lounged as always, wine in one hand, cards in the other. But the laughter he forced during games with friends from lesser noble houses felt hollow now. He didn't ask about the inspector. He didn't want to know. Carmen hadn't left her room. She refused food, combed her hair mechanically, and whispered to herself at night. She kept a candle burning by the window, as if waiting for something that might never return. But it was Rodrigo who changed the most. The boy had always been bright, curious, and a little too observant for his own good. But now he moved like someone carrying secrets in both pockets. He spoke less, watched more, listened when adults thought they were alone. And most dangerously of all, he began writing things down. In a small leather notebook gifted by his mother. Months ago, he began keeping what he called the mansion questions. Why does Papa carry blood on his cuffs after rainy nights? Why does the cellar door stay locked until new moons? Why do our horses return sweating without ever leaving the gate? And what was that scream? Rodrigo had heard it not just once. That final night, the one they all pretended never happened, he had heard Don Carlos scream, loud and long, until it suddenly cut off, like a candle snuffed out. He asked his mother about it the next morning. She turned pale, dropped her spoon, and whispered, "You dreamt it, mi cielo." But Rodrigo hadn't. One afternoon, while Don Sebastian was away at a trade meeting and Diego passed out drunk on a velvet chaise, Rodrigo wandered the corridors, gripping the notebook tight in his hand. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, and he saw the glint of metal inside his father's study. Left slightly ajar, the afternoon light struck the edge of something shiny tucked inside a drawer. Rodrigo tiptoed in, heart thudding, and opened it slowly. There it was, the iron key. Old, ornate, blackened with age, and unmistakably meant for one door only. The subcellar. He knew it because he had seen his father use it the night of the inspector's arrival. And now he had it in his own small, shaking hands. He didn't go immediately. Instead, he waited until just before midnight, when everyone was asleep or pretending to be. The house, always too quiet at night, now seemed to hold its breath. As Rodrigo made his way down the back stairwell, the cellar door creaked open with a groan. Like an old man rising from sleep, the cold hit him instantly. But he kept moving. But Rodrigo had brought a candle and his notebook. The stairs groaned beneath him, but he didn't turn back. When he reached the lower level, the hidden chamber, he paused. It was worse than he remembered. The symbols carved into the walls looked darker now, as if they'd been painted with something that had not yet dried. The pit sat quietly in the center, lidless, breathing its invisible breath of cold and earth. Rodrigo took one step closer, and that's when he heard it. A whisper, not words but a sound, like something speaking without a voice. His candle flickered. He stopped breathing. The sound came from inside the pit. He knelt slowly, peering into it. There was no bottom, only layers of dark, writhing mist. And then, a shape. Just for a moment. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. Something that had eyes. He fell back, scrambling to his feet, dropping his notebook. The candle hit the floor and went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Carmen woke with a jolt. She didn't know why, but she knew something had happened. She ran, barefoot through the hallways, her nightgown trailing behind her like a ghost. She reached the cellar door just in time to see Rodrigo stumble out, covered in dust and shaking. "Rodrigo," she gasped, catching him. He clung to her, not speaking. "What did you see?" she whispered, holding his face in her hands. His lips trembled. "There's something down there," he said. "It watches. It's hungry." Carmen didn't look shocked. She didn't even ask what. She just nodded. Carmen had always been the quiet one, the one whose beauty drew stares, but whose gaze never returned them. From a young age she had sensed things others couldn't name. Whispers behind walls, shadows that moved when no one did. The scent. of old stone and damp soil that clung to her father like an invisible cloak. While the rest of the family wore smiles in daylight and silence at night, Carmen kept her eyes open. She had known about the pit for years, not its origin, not its name if it even had one, but she had felt it, its pull, its watching. She had once followed a maid who had forgotten to relock the cellar door, and what she found at the bottom of those stairs had haunted her ever since. She hadn't told anyone, not even Rodrigo, because in their house, truth was currency, and currency had cost Dot. After helping her brother back to bed, Carmen sat by his side for hours. He had fallen asleep finally, exhausted by terror, and clutching a blanket like a shield. She noticed he had lost something, his notebook. He must have dropped it in the chamber. She would retrieve it, not out of fear it would be found, but because she needed to know what he had written. The boy's eyes had been wide with understanding, now more than any child should bear. As the house slept, Carmen dressed quietly and lit a small lantern. She moved like a shadow, careful not to wake even the paintings. When she reached the cellar again, the air had grown colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves remembered. The notebook was there, lying near the edge of the pit. She picked it up, heart pounding, and flipped through the pages. Each line stung with truth. Papa's shoes are muddy every new moon. Mama prays in a different language. What is the pit? Why is it hungry? She read page after page until her hand trembled, and then she heard the whispering. Not from the pit this time, but from the walls. A soft flutter like pages turning on their own. She turned toward the far left corner of the chamber, where a heavy shelf sat leaning against the stone. She hadn't noticed it before. No one had. The shelf looked newer than the room itself. Curious, Carmen stepped forward and pressed her hands against it. It didn't move easily, but with a firm push, it slid just slightly, revealing a narrow space behind it. Dust flew, cobwebs caught in her hair. Inside the gap was a wooden box, darkened by age and sealed with wax. A symbol was carved into the lid, a serpent coiled around a chalice, its tail forming an infinity loop. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside lay a book, bound in cracked leather, pages yellowed and ink faded. A name was embossed on the cover in a script so ancient it shimmered oddly in the lantern light. Vasconcelos, libro de sangre y suelo, book of blood and soil. Carmen's breath caught. She knew the name. Her great-grandfather, Don Aurelio Vasconcelos, had been rumored mad by the family. A man who spoke to walls and dug in gardens where nothing grew. But she now understood. He hadn't been insane. He had known. She opened the book slowly. The pages weren't written in Spanish, but in a blend of Latin and something older, something native. She recognized glyphs, symbols like those carved in the chamber walls. There were rituals, offerings, dates, instructions. She read in silence, eyes darting line by line, and with every paragraph the truth sank deeper into her bones. Their wealth hadn't come from gold, it had come from sacrifice. Once a generation, the Vasconcelos were required to feed the pit. It was not just some demonic entity, it was something far older, something tied to the land, to the blood beneath Mexico City itself. It promised protection, prosperity, dominance, but only if fed in return. Animals, at first, then servants. Then, when the wealth grew, outsiders, inspectors, priests, anyone who came too close. And Carmen understood what no one else dared speak aloud, that Vasconcelos were caretakers of something monstrous, something ancient and buried but never dead. Now Rodrigo had seen it. Would he be next? Morning came slow to the Vasconcelos estate, as if even the sun hesitated to shine on it. The usual sounds of servants starting their routines felt muffled, cautious, as though the mansion itself had soaked up too much silence during the night. In the eastern corridor, Donna Esperanza sat alone in her dressing room, combing her hair in front of a mirror that never showed her quite as she remembered herself. She was beautiful still, yes, but there were cracks in that beauty now, shadows beneath her eyes, a stiffness in her hands, and a heaviness around her mouth that refused to lift. Even when she smiled, she didn't look up when Carmen entered the room, holding the leather-bound book tight against her chest. "I found it," Carmen said quietly. Her mother froze mid-stroke, mid-breath, then slowly placed the brush on the vanity where she asked, though her voice was already defeated. "In the cellar," Carmen replied, "behind the shelf." "You hid it, well, Doña Esperanza?" Didn't he ask what Carmen had read? She didn't deny anything. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "You weren't supposed to see that." "Not yet, but I did," Carmen said, "and now I understand." A long silence followed. Finally, Dona Esperanza opened her eyes, and in them, Carmen saw not fear but grief. "I tried to stop it once," she said. "When I was your age, I thought I could change things. I thought I could save us. Carmen stepped closer. What happened? Her mother smiled, but it was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of someone who had bled beneath her silence for years. I watched my own brother disappear. Carmen's breath caught. Your uncle, Dona Esperanza said softly. He was only 17, bold, loud, and clever. He found the pit. He thought it was cursed. He told my father, Dona Aurelio, thought the truth could change something. He didn't understand that it was already part of us. She looked into her daughter's eyes then. 2 days later, he fell from a balcony. They called it an accident, but I found a note in his room, torn, smudged with mud. It said only 2 words. It knows. The silence that followed was unbearable. Carmen finally broke it. And you still stayed. I married Sebastian. To survive, Esperanza said bitterly. He already knew the family's legacy. His job was to continue it. Mine was to pretend I didn't see. Carmen stared at the floor. You never tried to run. I did. Her mother's voice broke. When you were little, when Rodrigo had just been born. I packed everything. We made it as far as the outskirts of Calco, then the carriage overturned. Carmen's eyes widened. I thought that was an accident. So did the driver, Esperanza whispered. But I saw the same symbol carved into the back of the seat, the serpent around the chalice, the same one on the book. It let us live, because I returned, but I knew then we would never truly leave. Not while the pit remains. Blood in the lineage. Carmen opened the book and laid it gently on the vanity between them. There's more in here than rituals, she said. There are rules and prophecies. One passage mentioned something about the child who sees beyond. I think it's Rodrigo. Esperanza nodded slowly. Yes, your great-grandfather believed that every few generations a Vasconcelos child would be born with a connection to the pit, not worship, not obedience, awareness. He called them los testigos, the witnesses. Witnesses to what? To the end, her mother said, or to the breaking. Carmen sat beside her. Then maybe Rodrigo can stop it. Esperanza looked at her daughter with eyes full of sorrow. Or maybe he'll be the one it demands. They both knew what that meant. The pit always demanded something. It was due, and Rodrigo had seen too much. The choice ahead that night. Carmen didn't sleep. She sat by the window in her bedroom, the book of blood and soil resting on her lap. She flipped through its ancient pages again and again, hoping, praying, for a clue, a loophole, a way out. She read about bloodlines and oaths, about how the pit came alive only under the new moon, and how it preferred those of light born under shadows. Whatever it was, it thought, it waited. It chose. Suddenly, a sound startled her. A knock. It was Rodrigo. I had a dream, he said. Carmen looked at him closely. Tell me. He walked to the edge of the bed, his face pale, his eyes glassy. I was in the cellar again, he said. But this time the pit spoke. What did it say? Rodrigo looked down. It said, one must open, one must close. Carmen swallowed hard. What do you think it meant? Rodrigo didn't answer, but Carmen could feel it deep in her chest, under her skin, in her bones. The pit was waking again, and it wanted more than gold this time. The following nights passed like fog drifting through the halls, quiet but full of tension, as if the house knew something was coming. Rodrigo had stopped speaking much. He no longer asked questions aloud. He only stared at corners of the room, when he thought no one was watching, whispering things under his breath. Carmen noticed he had begun sleeping with the book hidden beneath his pillow, not the Libro de Sangre, but his own notebook, the one filled with innocent observations that now read like a map of doom. Then came the dream. He woke up in the middle of the night, eyes wide and soaked in sweat. But unlike the last time, he didn't scream. He smiled. That scared Carmen more than anything else. She came running into his room as soon as she heard the floor creak. Rodrigo sat upright on his bed, hands folded in his lap like he was waiting. Spoke again, he said, voice calm, and this time, it showed me something. Carmen knelt beside him. What did it show you? A place, a jungle, ancient trees, and a pyramid broken in half like someone had tried to bury it. Carmen's eyes widened. A pyramid, he nodded. There were bones, he continued. Thousands, buried around it like they were guarding something inside. And the pit, it wasn't just there. It was everywhere, like veins in the earth. Carmen shivered. Rodrigo's voice dropped lower, and it said something new. The offering was stolen. The balance is broken. What offering? He looked up at her. I think it means Don Carlos. The balance undone the next morning. Carmen returned to the book. She flipped deeper into its pages, past the rituals and incantations. until she found a section that hadn't made sense before. The passages about the echoing chamber. It described a time before Mexico City, before even the Aztecs, when the land had belonged to the whispering earth gods, entities that fed on human devotion, not prayers, but sacrifice. One particular line struck her cold. If one not chosen is taken, the soil turns restless. The pit remembers. It does not forgive mistakes. Carmen understood then. Don Carlos was never meant to be given. He wasn't part of the lineage. The pit may have accepted him, but it hadn't been satisfied. It had been insulted. This was not a machine that obeyed blindly. It was a willful entity, ancient and sentient. It knew the rules better than the Vasconcelos did. And now, the punishment for that error was unfolding. Through Rodrigo. Because Rodrigo was next. The whispered record later that day. Carmen slipped away from the mansion and made her way to the convent archives beside the church of Santo Domingo. She wore a black lace shawl and carried a letter from her mother authorizing research into family history. The nuns were used to Vasconcelos' inquiries. Genealogy was important to noble bloodlines. But Carmen asked for something different. Any records of unusual land surveys, cave systems, or ruins beneath the old city. At first, the nuns were skeptical, but after some quiet persuasion and a generous silver coin, one Sister Consuela handed over a tattered folder marked Vasconcelos' Private Estate Excavation 1712. Inside were old sketches, hand-drawn maps, and a translated fragment of Nahuatl text, attributed to a long-forgotten priest who had traveled with the first Vasconcelos settlers. Carmen traced the ink with her fingers and read aloud to herself. Underneath the stone, it waits. It fed before the temples. It watched before the tribes, and it made pacts with those who would keep its name hidden. But every third bloodline must decide, become the vessel, or break the chain. She sat back, stunned. Third bloodline. It had been nearly 3 generations since Don Aurelio, her great-grandfather, had begun the pact again. Rodrigo was the third child. And according to the book, that made him the vessel. To become or to break back at the mansion. Rodrigo stood in the courtyard under the mango tree, staring at the sky. The clouds gathered overhead in thick coils, gray and sluggish, like the storm couldn't quite begin. He didn't flinch when the wind picked up. He simply whispered, "It's almost time." Carmen found him there. "You knew, didn't you?" she asked, voice quiet. Rodrigo nodded. "It talks to me when I sleep. It shows me the inside of things, our house, the earth, even people. I know how Papa dies. I know where Mama hides the coins. I know that Diego never really sleeps." Carmen grabbed his hand. "You're not a vessel, you're not." Rodrigo didn't resist, but he didn't agree either. "You read the book," he said. "I did." "Then you know what happens if I don't go." She did. The pit would take someone else. Maybe Diego, maybe Esperanza, maybe all of them. "But there's a third choice," she said. "The book said vessel or breaker. What if we break the chain?" Rodrigo looked at her. For the first time in days, his eyes shone with hope but also with fear. "How?" "I don't know yet," Carmen admitted. "But we're going to find out. Together." Above them, the first drop of rain finally fell. The rain fell steadily now, thick and unrelenting, pounding against the stained glass windows of the Vasconcelos mansion, like fists demanding to be let in. Thunder rolled over the rooftops of Mexico City, but the true storm was beneath the earth. Far from the gaze of priests or kings, Rodrigo waited by the cellar door, the iron key gripped tightly in his hand. He hadn't asked for Carmen's permission. He didn't need to. She had told him the truth. And now, the pit was calling, louder, clearer, closer. Carmen joined him moments later, soaked from the courtyard. "De libro de sangre y suelo presed," to her chest. She had gone back through its final pages she hadn't dared read until now. They spoke of a last chamber beneath the pit, a sealed place, a forgotten place, a place even the Vasconcelos feared. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Rodrigo's eyes were glassy, far away. "I don't think we'll get another chance." The key turned in the lock with a heavy click. The door groaned open. They stepped inside. The candlelight struggled against the cold as they descended the stone staircase. When they reached the hidden subcellar, the pit waited in the center like a wound in the world. But tonight, it was not silent. A low hum echoed from within, barely perceptible but undeniably alive, like breath traveling through bone. Rodrigo stood at the edge and looked down. "It wants me to enter." Carmen caught his arm. "No, not without me." Then something new, something terrible happened. The pit opened. Not metaphorically, not symbolically opened. The ground trembled. A ring of stone around the rim split down the middle with a grinding sound, revealing a spiral staircase that led straight down into blackness. The siblings stared in stunned silence. Did the book mention this? Rodrigo asked. No, Carmen whispered. Not once. The descent, they descended slowly, step by step, lantern held between them. The deeper they went, the more the walls changed. Stone gave way to carved obsidian, inlaid with glowing mineral veins, that shimmered faintly in the dark like stars pulled underground. The air was thick, not stale, not damp, but charged. It smelled like smoke and memory. Carmen could feel her heart pounding in her throat. Finally, they reached the bottom. It was a chamber, circular, enormous, and silent. The floor was marked with the same ancient symbol as the book, the serpent, wrapped around the chalice. At the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and on it sat something unexpected, a person, or something that had once been a person. It sat cross-legged, eyes shut, skin like dry bark, hair long and silvered, reaching the floor. It didn't breathe, it didn't move. Then it spoke, not aloud but into their minds. Vasconcelos, you finally return, Rodrigo gasped. Carmen froze. Who are you? She asked aloud. The voice replied, still soundless. I am the keeper, bound since the first pact. I was the first vessel. I was the last breaker. Carmen stepped forward. You broke the pact. No, I failed to, and thus became its guardian. My body lives beyond time. My will is not mine. Rodrigo trembled. Can it be ended? The figure raised its head. Its face was hollow, features worn by centuries. But its eyes were full of fire. Only if the blood of the root rejects the soil. Carmen's brow furrowed. What does that mean? It means, one of you must descend willingly. Not to feed the pit but to close it from within, to take the curse, and carry it away. Rodrigo turned to his sister. Me, he said. No, Carmen replied instantly. Rodrigo took her hands. I'm the one it calls. I always was. I feel it, like music under my skin. But if you go in, you may never come back, she said, voice cracking. Rodrigo smiled sadly. Then break the chain. Don't let anyone open it again. The keeper raised one hand and pointed to the wall. A panel slid open, revealing a chamber of roots, massive dark tendrils pulsing with slow rhythmic light. Step through, said the voice. Bind it with your name, and it will sleep again. Carmen hugged him tightly. Tears streamed down her cheeks. You're just a child, she whispered. I won't be, he said. Not after this. Our brothers sacrifice. Rodrigo stepped into the root chamber. The tendrils closed around him like a cloak. Carmen saw his silhouette blur, distort, then vanish entirely. The humming stopped. The glow faded. The chamber fell silent, and the keeper turned to stone. Carmen dropped to her knees, hand shaking. Her little brother gone, not in blood, but in memory, a sacrifice not to feed, but to end the hunger. And yet, she knew, somewhere beneath the world, he still lived. The mansion was too quiet, not the peaceful kind, not the kind that follows a storm or settles after laughter. This was the silence of stunned breath, of unfinished rituals, of rooms holding secrets in their walls like pressed flowers. Carmen returned. Alone, the spiral staircase that had opened beneath the pit was gone now, sealed by unseen force, the stone floor once again whole as if nothing had ever happened. She stood for a long time, hand against the cold surface, trying to feel something, a heartbeat, a whisper, a tremor, but it was gone. Rodrigo was gone. And yet, as she climbed the steps and left the cellar behind, she couldn't shake the feeling that something followed her, not in body, but in memory. A shadow on her skin, a warmth in her palm where his hand had last held hers. When she reached her room, the rain had stopped. The house breathed again, but differently now, like it had forgotten how the lie that saves by the following morning. Carmen had constructed a story that it had to be simple, it had to be believable that Rodrigo had run away. He had left a note, she claimed, saying he couldn't live under the family's shadow, that he needed to find peace elsewhere, that he wouldn't return. Diego didn't ask questions. He barely looked up from his wine. Dona Esperanza nodded softly, tears in her eyes, but not surprise. Perhaps, deep down, she knew the truth, didn't want to. Don Sebastian accepted the story too, though his eyes narrowed when Carmen delivered it. You let him go, he asked. God. Carmen met his stare. He was never yours to keep. That was the last time her father looked at her like a child. The weight of the book. Carmen kept the Libro de Sangre y Suelo hidden under her mattress, though its presence burned like a brand. She tried not to open it again, but guilt would not let her rest. On the fourth night after Rodrigo's descent, she lit a candle and opened it once more. Something was different. The ink had faded on some pages, as if time had started to eat the book. Entire sections of ritual text were now blank, or worse, rewritten. On the final page, where once it had read, vessel or breaker blood, must bind. It now read, "What is broken, may bleed." Carmen froze. She hadn't written that. Number 1 had the page was fresh. The ink still damp. She slammed the book shut. The echoes returned later that week. The servants began murmuring again, quiet complaints, things missing, horses restless. One made claim to hear scratching beneath the floorboards. Another said she found all the candles in the chapel melted into the shape of a hand. Carmen dismissed them, at least out loud, but every night she dreamed of roots, not dead ones, not buried, moving, alive, reaching, and always, at the center of the dream, Rodrigo. But older Jot changed, not cruel, not monstrous, but distant, watching her, and never blinking. The painting one evening, while walking through the family gallery, Carmen noticed something that chilled her blood. The painting of Don Urioha, great-grandfather, had changed, only slightly, just enough to catch the eye. Before, he had stood beside a mining map, his hand on a cane. But now, in the shadow behind him, barely visible in the background, was a small figure, a boy, dressed like Rodrigo. Eyes white. Carmen blinked. The figure was gone, but she knew what she had seen. The choice ahead that night. Carmen stood alone in the courtyard. The moon was full, not new, safe, but she felt anything but safe. She looked up at the sky, whispered toward the stars, "Are you still there?" No reply came, only wind, but deep below, far beneath the stone and bones of Mexico City, something ancient stirred once more, not hungry, not angry, just waiting. The letter was hidden behind the chapel crucifix, sealed in wax and wrapped in velvet so old it crumbled at Carmen's touch. She had gone there not for prayer but for silence. The chapel had always been her mother's domain, where she whispered, in that strange tongue, and wept behind heavy drapes. Carmen had never noticed the panel on the wall until that night, when moonlight struck it just right, a thin groove, a subtle outline, a space where stone didn't quite meet stone. She pried it open, half expecting dust. Instead, she found history. The parchment was brittle and yellowed, the ink faded but legible. It was signed Don Aurelio Vasconcelos, her great-grandfather, the man the family never spoke of except in hushed, careful phrases. They had called him brilliant, disturbed even, cursed. Now Carmen understood why. The letter was not addressed to anyone. It read more like a confession to time itself, as though Don Aurelio had written it, knowing it might one day save or damn them all. He described the pit not as a discovery but as an inheritance, passed through centuries, dug deeper by blood, not shovels. He wrote of the day he first heard it speak, how it did not use words, but dreams, how it knew things, knew when the Spaniards arrived, knew when the temples burned, knew when the family lied. Aurelio had tried to close it, just as Rodrigo had. He had studied ancient texts, drawn symbols from forgotten temples, poured silver and salt into its mouth. For a time, it had worked. The pit went quiet. The family prospered without sacrifice. But then the rains came, not for weeks, but months. The earth cracked, fever spread, crops rotted in the soil, 3 children vanished from neighboring estates. The pit, Aurelio wrote, does not die, it sleeps, and when it wakes it remembers who tried to silence it. His warning chilled Carmen to the bone. You can buy silence, he had written, but never forgiveness. The pit is not a hole, it is a door, and doors are meant to open. Carmen read the letter twice. Then a third time, her fingers trembled. The storm outside grew louder. Thunder crawled along the rooftop like claws. She looked around the chapel, at the saints staring down from their painted windows. Even they seemed powerless. Rodrigo had gone willingly, but Aurelio's words suggested it might not have been enough. Not forever, not truly. She folded the letter, tucked it into the libro de sangre, and held it against her chest. The pit may have closed, but something was still awake, and it had her family's name in its mouth. Carmen hadn't stepped into the cellar since Rodrigo vanished into the roots. Days had passed, maybe a week. Time inside the mansion moved strangely, now stretched and slowed, like it was being pulled apart by invisible strings. Conversations ended before they began. The servants moved as if underwater, and at night, the walls they creaked like they were breathing. She had taken to sleeping with the libro de sangre y suelo under her pillow and Don Aurelio's letter tucked between its pages. Every night before sleep, she read the same line again and again. The pit is not a hole, it is a door, and doors are meant to open. She didn't want to believe it, but every part of her did. It started with the birds. At first, only a few crows began gathering near the mansion's northern garden, perched in unnatural stillness on the twisted branches of a jacaranda tree, but by the third morning, the tree was black with them. They didn't move, they didn't call, they simply stared at the mansion, watching, waiting. Carmen noticed them from her bedroom window. She thought of telling her mother but stopped. Herself, Dona Esperanza was no longer the quiet, weary matron she had been since Rodrigo's disappearance. Something in her had broken that violently, but slowly, like porcelain cracked under pressure. She spent her days reciting the same forgotten prayer over and over, beads of her rosary worn smooth from constant motion. When Carmen entered the chapel one afternoon, her mother didn't even look up. Her lips moved, her hands twitched, but her eyes were unfocused, distant. Carmen called her name twice, no response. On the third try, Dona Esperanza finally blinked and said only, "He's still down there." Carmen froze. Who? Her mother turned her head, ever so slightly. The little one. He hasn't left, he just changed. And then, as if she hadn't spoken at all, she went back to her whispering. That night, Carmen heard the whisper, too. It came from beneath the floor, low, muffled, like wind moving through roots. It didn't form words, but it had rhythm, intention. She got out of bed and pressed her palm to the wooden floorboards. They were warm, pulsing, she thought. Of the dreams she had been having, always the same. The roots, a chamber, the boy with the white eyes. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he simply watched. But in every dream he stood at a gate carved in stone, one she had never seen before. She knew what she had to do. If the pit was a door, she needed to see where it led, truly, not in dream, not in memory, but with open eyes. She returned to the cellar at midnight, lantern in one hand, the book in the other. This time, the door opened without the key. That alone chilled her to the core. She descended the steps slowly, heart pounding so loudly it seemed to echo off the walls. The pit waited in silence. The floor where the spiral staircase had once emerged was now unbroken again, but the air above it shimmered just barely, like heat rising off desert stone. She stepped closer. The air smelled like cedar and iron and something older, like rain on dry bones. She whispered Rodrigo's name. The shimmer grew, and then the floor cracked, only slightly, just enough to split the stone like a thin sheet of ice, a sliver, a line. But from it came a sound like breath, a sigh of something waking up. Carmen fell to her knees and opened the book. She began reading aloud, unsure why, unsure how. Her voice trembled, but she continued, "Let the root remember, let the watcher sleep, let the earth close its eye." She repeated the phrase again and again, each time, louder, stronger. The pit pulsed beneath her, and suddenly, she could feel it in her bones, an ache in her teeth, her skull, her spine. The language wasn't meant to be spoken by human tongues. But still she spoke. The air turned sharp, cold, and then like a heartbeat a thud beneath her feet. A shape began to rise from the floor. She stumbled back as it emerged, not Rodrigo, but something like him, small, barefoot, eyes glowing faintly. His clothes were the same, but his face had changed, older, wiser, and impossibly still. "Rodrigo," she whispered. He tilted his head. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but his voice wasn't quite his own. "I need to know if it's over," she said. "I need to know what I've done." He stepped closer. "You stopped the sacrifice that's never been done before, but now something else must be fed." Her stomach dropped. "What? The memory? What memory?" "All of it," he said. "The Vasconcelos, the door, the name. You can't close something that still has a story. It will stay open, as long as someone remembers." Tears welled in her eyes. "But how do I forget my brother?" He stared at her, not cruel, not cold, just ... sad. "You don't. You carry it. And in time, if you carry it long enough, it carries you." Then he reached out, touched her hand, and whispered one word. "Run." The floor exploded behind her. Roots burst through stone, ancient and alive, writhing like serpents, crashing into the walls. The candles blew out. The lantern shattered. Darkness roared through the chamber. Carmen ran. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She could feel it chasing her, not Rodrigo, not the pit, but the truth. And truth, she now knew, was heavier than death. She reached the upper floor, slammed the cellar door behind her, and collapsed in the hallway, gasping for breath. The mansion shook once. Just once. Then it fell silent. When morning came, the servants found her asleep in the corridor. She said nothing. She had no words left. She burned the book that day. She took it into the courtyard, poured lamp oil over it, and dropped a match. The flames caught fast, curling the pages into ash. She expected to hear screaming, whispering, something, but there was only silence. When the last page turned to dust, she stood and looked toward the garden where the jacaranda tree once stood. The birds were gone, and for the first time in weeks, The mansion felt still. But Carmen knew better. It wasn't gone. It was only waiting for another story. And one day, someone would find it again. In the weeks that followed the fire, the Vasconcelos mansion seemed to return to normal, but only on the surface. The birds didn't come back. The cellar door stayed closed, its lock now sealed with melted iron. Diego left for Veracruz without a word, chasing rumors of investment opportunities that would never bear fruit. Dona Esperanza became almost ghost-like, drifting through the halls like a memory in motion. She rarely spoke, never ate in front of anyone. Sometimes Carmen would find her standing at windows she never used to look through, eyes locked on something far beyond the city. When asked what she was watching, she'd only whisper, "To see if it follows us." Carmen, for her part, tried to return to routine. She hosted tea in the afternoon. She walked the courtyard gardens with deliberate grace. She responded to letters from other noble families, politely declining invitations. But something inside her had broken and rebuilt itself into something quieter, sharper. The world felt slower now, or maybe she had become faster. She saw every glance from a guest as a possible question, every creak in the wall as a message, every shadow as a memory reaching back to her from the roots of the earth. The mansion may have quieted, but the curse had not lifted. It had simply changed shape. The whispers didn't return in words. Not this time. They came through coincidence. Guests at the estate began to complain of sudden chills in the drawing room, even when the fireplaces roared. Flowers that Carmen planted in the garden wilted within hours. The chapel's candles would melt into strange spirals overnight. At first, she blamed faulty wax. Then she remembered what Rodrigo had said. The pit does not want blood now. It wants memory, and memory, Carmen had learned, could live in things, in objects, in places. One morning, a letter arrived from the monastery archives. Sister Consuela, the old nun who had once helped Carmen find Don Aurelio's excavation papers, had passed away. Along with the notice came a box, sealed with twine and labeled, simply, "For the Vasconcelos girl, she will understand." Inside were two things: a rusted iron key that looked nearly identical to the one Carmen had used to unlock the cellar, and a small linen pouch. She opened the pouch carefully, expecting coins or trinkets. What spilled into her palm stopped her heart. Ash. Fine. Soft ash. Attached to the pouch was a note in the same trembling hand as the box label. Memory is only safe when scattered. Burn what you find. Salt what you burn. Bury what remains. That night, Carmen didn't sleep. She sat in the chapel again, though she no longer prayed. She simply sat, eyes fixed on the crucifix, wondering how much of her faith was real and how much was habit. She had burned the book, but maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe the pit had left traces in more than just pages. Her eyes drifted to the oil painting of Don Aurelio again, the one she had thought changed. Now it looked normal, like it had become alert to her attention. She rose slowly, walked toward it, and examined the edges of the frame. It was older than she'd realized. Heavy, the backing looked strange loose. She lifted the frame off the wall with effort and turned it over. Wedged between the canvas and wood was a folded piece of parchment, dry and stiff with age. Another letter. This one was addressed directly to her, though dated over 60 years ago. "If you are reading this, then the pit has called another girl, and that girl is you. Know this. Burning is not enough. The pit feeds on story. Yes, but stories live on in voices, in names, in blood. It is not your duty to kill it. It cannot be killed. Your duty is to bury it in silence, to make the world forget it ever existed. Bury it in silence." She folded the note slowly, placed it back inside the painting, and rehung the frame. She didn't cry, she didn't tremble. She had made her peace with fear long ago, but now she understood the full burden that had been passed to her. It wasn't the pit she had to fight, it was the memory of it. The next day she began erasing. She ordered the family archives locked away. She burned old ledgers, letters, diaries. She had the mansion repainted, tapestries removed, portraits of past Vasconcelos taken down, rolled, and locked in crates she labeled for storage but would never retrieve. She dismissed all servants except one, a quiet, aging woman named Pilar, who had been with them since Carmen was born and who asked no questions. She sealed off the cellar with bricks and lime. She had the chapel deconsecrated. The family crest, where once the red field and golden eagle had stood proudly, she now adopted a blank seal. Nothing, no symbol, no legacy. The name Vasconcelos remained, but it became ordinary. By the end of the month, neighbors remarked that the mansion had become a quiet place again. Elegant, faded perhaps, but not cursed. Just another old house in a city of ghosts. Carmen no longer dreamed of Rodrigo. That scared her more than anything. She had expected nightmares, visitations, hauntings, but there was nothing, only emptiness. Sometimes, late at night, she'd walk the garden paths and stop beneath the jacaranda tree now bare, its leaves never having returned. She'd stand there for hours, waiting, listening, but the ground remained still, and so did she, because now she understood. The silence wasn't absence, it was victory. For now. The first outsider came in spring. His name was Mateo de Villaba, a historian from Seville claiming to trace the origins of forgotten noble lineages in New Spain. He arrived with soft leather shoes, a linen notebook filled with names, and took many questions. At first Carmen ignored him. He sent letters to the mansion 3, then 5, each more polite and persistent than the last. When Pelaya finally handed her the 6th letter, Carmen didn't open it. She burned it in the fireplace, and watched the paper curl and vanish into smoke. But still, he came. He waited outside the mansion gate one afternoon, his coat spotless, despite the dust of the plaza. When Carmen passed him on her way to the carriage, he removed his hat, and bowed with a practiced elegance. "Señorita Vasconcelos," he said, "I believe your family holds secrets that may illuminate a great mystery in our colonial past. Just 15 minutes of your time." She paused. Not out of interest, out of caution. The name Vasconcelos had not appeared in scholarly writings for decades. She had worked tirelessly to make sure of it, and yet here he was, saying it out loud in daylight, as if it were just another surname. "What do you want?" she asked, voice cold as cut glass. Mateo smiled, too gently. "There's a map, an incomplete survey from 1712, signed by a Don Vasconcelos. It shows an excavation beneath this very property. The markings, well, they don't look Spanish." Carmen's spine stiffened. "And I'd like to see what's beneath the house." "You'd like to die." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Mateo blinked, startled. Carmen stepped closer, her face inches from his. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "There is nothing beneath this house. There never was. And if you keep digging into ghosts, you'll find yourself swallowed by something older than bones." She turned and walked away without another word. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat in the study, staring at the last remaining portrait. On the wall, her mother's, painted shortly before Esperanza's death. The eyes were tired, but the smile was real. Carmen had it covered with a white cloth now, only uncovering it when she needed strength. Tonight, she needed more than that. She needed clarity. She retrieved the Libro de Sangre, Suelo, or rather, what remained of it. The fire had destroyed the original, but Carmen had begun a new volume, a silent one. She called it Il Silencio de las Raíces, the silence of roots. In it, she didn't write spells or records. She wrote warnings, instructions, rituals of forgetting, methods of erasure. It was not a book for power. It was a book to contain memory like a lantern holds flame, fragile, flickering, sacred. She opened to the last page. The words she had written days earlier stared back at her. "Memory can't be buried, but it can be led into the dark." She whispered the line again. And then a voice responded, not from the walls, from inside her own mind. "He is not the only one watching." Carmen stood abruptly. The house was quiet. Pilar was asleep. The city was asleep. But something was awake. She walked slowly to the hallway, candle in hand. The air was still, but cold. Not natural cold, death cold. She moved down the corridor until she reached the sealed cellar door. It hadn't been touched since the bricks were laid. She had watched the masons do it. Yet now, a faint mark appeared on the center stone. A handprint, smudged, dusty, small, like Rodrigo's. Her breath caught. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She only stared. And as she stared, the handprint began to flake away, dissolving into ash. She didn't sleep after that. The next day, Mateo returned. This time, he didn't bring letters. He brought a warning. A man had gone missing, a young researcher sent by his university to survey old properties mentioned in Don Aurelio's excavation notes. His last known stop had been near the old cemetery on Calle del Rosario, a short walk from Plaza Santo Domingo. "I'm not saying it's connected," Mateo told her, "but I think you know it is." Carmen didn't respond. Mateo continued. "There's something buried in this city. Something older than records, older than churches. The Nahua called it the sleeper beneath the fruitless tree. The Maya believed it to be a god exiled into the roots of mountains. Whatever it is, it's waking, and if we don't name it, you'll feed it." Carmen's voice cut through the air. Mateo stepped back. "I beg your pardon, you want to study it. You think it's a puzzle. You think you can control But it's not meant to be controlled. It's meant to be left alone. That's the only way it sleeps. I don't believe in curses, Matteo replied, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. Good, she said. Then you won't know when it comes for you. That evening, Carmen made a decision. She packed a satchel with a new book, salt, a vial of her own blood drawn from a ritual she had never dared attempt beforehand, a map of the original excavation site from 1712, not to summon, not to open, to bury. Truly bury. She would find the heart of the old tunnels, the very base. She would place the book there and seal it in a chamber of lime, salt, and silence. A final lock, not of stone, of story. Because Matteo was right about one thing. Stories live on. And she had written the last chapter as night fell over Mexico City. Carmen Vasconcelos walked alone into the shadowed streets, leaving behind the mansion, the gate, and the name she no longer wore like armor. The silence followed her, but this time, she walked toward it willingly, because silence was the only thing that ever held back the pit. The tunnel entrance lay forgotten behind the crumbled remnants of a colonial wall near the edge of the old cemetery. Carmen had followed the 1712 map precisely, tracing symbols burned into parchment with shaking fingers until the landmarks aligned. A sunsplit cross carved into a broken tree trunk, a well filled with earth instead of water, and a stone bearing the Vasconcelos serpent hotheist by time. It was nearly invisible now, disguised by moss and roots, but Carmen felt it the moment she stood near. A pull, a weight, a recognition. She knelt before the soil, pressed her fingers to the ground, and whispered a single word. Dormida. Asleep. The earth responded. It cracked just slightly, revealing a path not walked in decades. She descended into the dark, her satchel clutched tightly, the Libro del Silencio wrapped in cloth beside her blood vial and salt pouch. The path was narrow at first, lined with stone and mud, but as she moved deeper, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, an ancient cavern shaped not by tools but by time. The air was thick with humidity and memory. Her lantern flickered with each step, casting shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls, and the walls, they whispered again, not loudly, not words, but sighs, fragments of voices buried in stone. She heard children, prayers, cries muffled by dirt, and among them she heard Rodrigo, not the boy she remembered, the one with wide eyes and a notebook full of impossible questions, but something older, something that had become part of the pit. She paused at the center of the chamber where the roots of ancient trees had pierced the ceiling and grown down into the stone-like claws. Here she could feel at the true heart of the silence. It pulsed just beneath her feet. Carmen unpacked the cloth-wrapped book and set it gently on the floor. She surrounded it with salt. She uncorked the vial and dripped 3 drops of blood across the cover. Then, from memory, she spoke the sealing rite, a hybrid of the Vasconcelos tongue and the older language Don Aurelio had scribbled in the margins of his pages. May the soil bind the breath. May the root drink the fire. May the root drink the fire. The name be taken. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the earth rumbled deep and slow, like a dragon exhaling under layers of stone. The roots quivered, the salt burned, and the book began to sink, not vanish, not combust, sink, as though the ground had become liquid just long enough to swallow it whole. Carmen stood back, heart pounding. She whispered one last time, Dormido. Silence. True silence, not absence, not threat. Peace. She turned to leave, but the path behind her had changed. Where once there had been 1 tunnel, now there were 3, each identical, each breathing faintly. Carmen closed her eyes and listened, not with her ears, but with something deeper. She remembered Rodrigo's voice in the dream, telling her that memory couldn't be buried unless it wanted to be, that the pit didn't just live in earth, it lived in people. She thought about the portraits she'd hidden, the burned book, the chapel with its weeping saints. She thought about Matteo and his questions, and she made a choice. She picked the left tunnel. It twisted down, not up. Deeper. She followed it for hours, or minutes, it was impossible to tell. She was no longer afraid. She came to a final chamber. This one was smooth, round, covered in symbols. Not even the Libro de Sangre had. No, there was no pit here, only a chair carved of bone and wood, and behind it, a mirror. Carmen stepped toward it. She expected to see her reflection. She saw her mother instead. Esperanza stood in the mirror, younger than she had been in life, her hair loose, her hands folded, her eyes were calm. You came farther than I ever did, the reflection said. Carmen didn't reply. Her mother nodded. But you knew this was the cost. To bury memory, you must become its vessel, a living lock. I don't want to forget him, Carmen whispered. You won't, the mirror said. You'll remember everything, but no one else will. That's how the pit sleeps. Carmen sat in the chair. It was warm. The mirror flickered once and went black. The walls stopped breathing. The air turned still. In Mexico City, the Vasconcelos mansion stood quiet. The iron gates rusted. The garden grew wild. Locals said no one had lived there for years. Some claimed it was cursed. Others said it had simply been forgotten. Mateo de Villaba never returned. The university received his final report, incomplete and unsigned. The documents referenced a family that could no longer be found in any record. The name Vasconcelos had vanished. No lineage, no deeds, no graves, no memory. Only a single file remained in the National Archives, a water-damaged page from 1756, listing shipping manifests with a red mark scrawled over one name. Unreadable, illegible, erased, and beneath it, barely visible, written in ink that faded as it dried, word to words, spoken in a language no scholar could translate. But if you whispered them aloud, late at night, near Old Stone, the earth would grow still, and you would sleep. DREAMLESS. Just as the pit had always wanted. Years passed, the city changed, the streets widened, trolleys gave way to cars, bells were replaced by engines, and silence became rare, replaced by a hum that wrapped around every building like fog made of noise. Yet, tucked between two crumbling convent walls and a bookstore that no one entered, the Vasconcelos mansion remained. Time had wrapped its arms around it gently, but insistently. The paint peeled, the fountain dried, ivy choked the balconies. Most people who passed it didn't see it at all. It wasn't hidden. It was simply overlooked, forgotten. A house in plain sight that drew no memory. Until one day, someone remembered. A young girl, no older than 12, wandered through the neighborhood chasing a cat. She wasn't from the city. She was visiting her aunt, curious, observant, and untethered by adult logic. When she reached the mansion gate, the cat slithered through the bars and vanished into the underbrush. The girl pressed her face against the cold iron and stared. She didn't know why, but she felt something. Not fear, not sadness, something heavier, the kind of weight you feel in dreams. When everything is quiet just before the scream, she stood there for a long while before her aunt called her back. The cat never returned. That night, she dreamed of a woman in a white dress sitting on a chair made of roots. The woman didn't speak, she only watched. Behind her, the sky cracked open like a book, and thousands of names were erased line by line. In the dream, the girl asked, "What's your name?" The woman whispered something the girl forgot the moment she woke up. She didn't speak of the dream, not then. Elsewhere, a man named Andres Talavera stumbled upon an odd entry in the municipal records, a file misplaced, perhaps, or left unindexed by clerks long dead. It mentioned a trade family from the 18th century, Vasconcelos. The name stirred something in him. He was an archivist, not a historian, but names were his craft. He searched every database, every paper ledger, every digital scan and found nothing else. No descendants, no property tax records, no marriage alliances, only that one fragile mention. Intrigued, Andres visited the street listed in the document. There, hidden beneath the shadow of a new department store and across from a crumbling flower store, stood the mansion, unmarked, unclaimed. He stared at it for a long time. It wasn't the building that unnerved him, it was the fact that he hadn't seen it, though he had passed this street a dozen times. He walked up to the gate. Rust flaked under his fingers. The air inside was thick with pollen and rot. He took a photo. It didn't appear on his phone. He tried again, same result. He left unsettled. But he returned the next day and the next. The mansion had become a weight in his thoughts. Not like obsession, more like gravity. Meanwhile, the little girl, her name was Sal, began dreaming of the woman in white more often. In the dreams, the woman never aged. She sat in her chair of roots and watched Sol quietly. Sometimes the mirror behind her flickered. Sometimes the mirror cracked out. One night, the woman spoke. "Do you remember me yet?" Sol shook her head. The woman smiled gently. "Then the pit still sleeps." When Sol woke, she had dirt under her fingernails and the scent of ash in her hair. In the archives, Andres found something strange in an old priest's journal from the Santo Domingo convent. A single entry, undated, tucked between pages on livestock tithes and supply orders. "I saw her again. The girl. The one with no name. She watches from the chapel wall. Her hands hold nothing, yet the bells ring when she appears. I have burned the record 3 times, but the ink returns. She waits. She remembers. We must not." Andres blinked at the page. He looked up at the archivist's room around him, dusty dim, filled with the soft scent of paper, and Ajahn realized how loud the silence had become. He turned the page. On the next, only a drawing, a symbol, a serpent wrapped around a chalice. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, Andres returned to the mansion the next morning and stood outside the gate again. He reached through the bars and touched the iron lock. It broke off in his hand, like dried clay. He stepped inside. The garden had overtaken the path. Branches reached for his coat. Vines tugged at his boots. The air was heavy, damp. The house loomed above him, its windows like empty eyes. He entered, and it welcomed him. No dust, no creaking floorboards. Everything felt paused, not dead, not alive, just suspended. The hallway was lined with blank portraits, frames, but no faces. He stepped into what must have once been a drawing room. There, sitting on the mantel, was a single object, a chair carved of bone and wood. Miniature. Like a model. He reached for it, and the mirror above the fireplace shattered. He gasped, but behind the shards, written in faded black ink on the wall itself, was a single line: "The root drinks what the mind cannot hold." Andres turned and ran. That night Sol dreamed again. This time the woman stood up. She stepped down from her throne of roots and walked toward the child. "You must leave the city soon," she said. "Why?" "Because the wind remembers my name, and it is beginning to speak it again." Sol looked confused. "But I don't know your name." "You will." The dream ended with thunder. And the smell of rain. The next morning lightning struck the jacaranda tree beside the mansion. It hadn't grown leaves in over a century, but by dawn it bloomed, violet and trembling. People passing on their way to the market stopped and stared. A few took pictures. None of the photos came out. By noon, the petals fell. By night, the tree was ash. And in a basement no one had entered in generations. The roots beneath the house began to stir. Slowly, softly, but no longer silently.